it's very, very similar to the Altamaha pottery that the Yamasee make, but we would call it Ashley here, this design. And it's what the Indians, the local Indians, were making at the time that the English come, and probably up until 1700 or maybe even later. We're not really sure. It begins to break down. Then the other thing that you have in here, this nice smooth pottery right here, all of this we call Colono ware. Originally it was Colono Indian ware. And it's Colono Indian ware, and mostly Colono ware now. Colono. And this is made with the same local clays, the same way that the Americans are making, but a whole lot of this is made by Africans. And enslaved Africans that were bought, and they're making this pottery, and it's also being made by the Indians. And so we're not really sure who's teaching who to make pottery. There are a lot of Indian slaves, and suddenly then the Indian slaves begin to diminish, so Africans are brought in to replace them. You know, that's about the time that the rice, suddenly somebody discovers you can grow rice here, so you need a lot of people to grow rice, and there just aren't enough Indians. And the Indians don't work very well either, as it turns out. And most of the Indian slaves here are women. The men, they ship off to the Caribbean to grow sugar, to work in sugar plantations, because they didn't want the men to be here. Well, to be in the area, because if they could escape, and then they would be able to do things. The women are less likely to flee, you know, and they weren't seen as a threat. You know, they're not going to all get together and attack you like the men would, or organize themselves that way. So. Yeah, they did. You know, yeah, it's short-sighted. Yeah. Anyway, so
nothing left to be.
yeah, this is, you know, most of this we think is made by enslaved Africans. So yeah, Colono ware. But then, okay, so that kind of gets us into the whole thing of English settlement.
What is that?
It's glass. Exactly. Water. Oh, no. I bet it's not. It's like resin. Pine resin. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You can collect it to make turpentine and stuff, and it's just a big puddle of it. Yeah. In here. Good. This is all, yeah. This is pearl ware. You guys got this one right.
All right.
Yeah.
We got one with Tupperware in it.
Yeah. English made pottery that traded
Everybody here will be on the committee now.
all over the world, you know. So one thing I was going to say, compared to like the Native Americans, we're talking about these pottery types or series that exist over the entire southeastern coast or coastal area. And, you know, once the British potters figured out how to make pottery and make it, tons of it, and the mercantile system that Britain has, their ceramics are found all over the world. They're trading it everywhere, and it's everywhere. I've seen collections these guys had from West Africa, like the far north of Ghana, which is not too untoward because eventually that was a British colony, but there's pieces of pearlware and stuff from 18th century sites that are in the north of Ghana. There's coastal Ecuador. There's pieces of British ceramics there.
Now, which one is pearlware?
The
blue?
Yeah, the blue painted. And it has a very Chinese design on it.
We got it right.
Yeah, most of that, these European, or the efforts really to, most European ceramics that we see from the 17th and 18th century, and then even into the 19th century, there was a desire to mimic Chinese porcelain, which I don't know if you guys have any porcelain. It's not uncommon.
There was one piece, I can't remember which one it is.
That, you know, so these Chinese motifs are really, really popular in the blue, you know, blue pad, the blue pieces. Especially the earliest stuff that they sort of made is it's Delftware. You know, if you've seen Delft tiles, you know. But they made plates out of that, all kinds of stuff, and that's sort of late 17th century or into the early 18th century, and that's the principal tablewares of people. Delftwares, it has a tin glaze. The glaze, there's tin mixed into the glaze to make it, and it flakes away from the paste.
Are you saying
How you identify
tin?
it? Tin, T-I-N,
T-I-N, okay.
yeah, tin glaze, yeah.
Wasn't sure.
And that, I mean,
T-E-N.
yeah, and that's
I
really.
know I tin, I know I tin.
Actually, they began making that in the Levant in like the 11 or 1200s, and it spreads across into Italy, into Spain,
Oh, that's
and
right.
eventually into the Low Countries and into England. I mean, the Spanish are making it in Mexico. The Mallorcas, or Mallorca, is a tin glazed earthenware. It's the same as Delftware. It's just different patterns. It's that whole genre or type of ceramic that's made, and then that gets replaced. And here we are amongst the British by this stuff here, which is white salt glazed stoneware, and it's really hard. These other things are earthenwares, like the pearlware, and this is a stoneware. It's fired really high and hard, and this sort of patterns, and it's just molded, and that begins to be made around 1740s, and it's made until about the 1760s. And it's the most popular tableware type that people were using.
Does earthenware mean not fired?
No, it means it's the hardness or how hard the material is after it's fired.
How hot and far.
Yes, yeah.
How hot it
the
was.
temperature that you can raise it to, but also the clays themselves. Some clays are just, even if you heat them too much, they just break down. And so they won't work. So you have to have certain kinds of clays to make stonewares. And to make porcelain, you have to have kaolin clay. And so the kaolin,
Yeah.
K-O-A,
And where do you get find
Georgia.
that? Where do you find that?
well, there are big masses of it in Georgia that
Georgia.
nobody knew about until more recently. But like the Chinese pretty had a monopoly on it for a long, long time.
There's also some in Spruce Bend, North Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the same sort of band that it is in Georgia, but no one really found that. Although they were making the pipe clays, the white clay pipes are made out of kaolin. But there's a little bit more to making porcelain that the Europeans didn't figure out for a long, long time. So it was actually probably, they were trying to do it and working on it, but it was cheaper to go and buy Chinese porcelain than it was to probably make it.
The same kaolin clays are used in paper making
Oh yeah, okay.
for the smooth surfaces, printing surfaces, and opacity so that you can't see through it. Going all the way back to the Chinese and their kaolin clays. So that's one of the reasons that this was a very popular place for making paper, because you could get the clay from Georgia.
Anyway, so after that, the British potters began making creamware, which you guys have a piece here in. From the 1760s forward, and it has usually it has a more slightly buffer base than that, not quite as white. This is probably creamware or pearlware. And the creamwares, you begin to see shell edge forms. Again, these Chinese patterns it's blues and greens. There's a lot of other transfer prints as well, where they put a piece of paper on the thing and put some dye on there in the glaze, and when you fire it, it comes away and leaves the pattern. Those are real common, and often there's oriental themes to it, But creamware is the next big thing that happens. And then about 1780, they begin making pearlware, and again, they've changed the formulas of the clays to make the pottery, trying to get advantages one potter over another in England. Wedgwood is one of the principal developers. There's a bunch of others, and there's several centers of pottery, sort of like Staffordshire area. Those guys were real big on it. I don't see any of that right here. It's often this yellow glaze with some brown stuff. It's usually 17th and 18th century stuff. There's a piece of it. this kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
this is like Staffordshire, or always called it lead glazed earthenwares or slipwares, lead glazed slipwares. Now they're mixing lead into the glaze to clarify it. The metals are put in there to make the glaze clear when they fire it, make it hard, right? So lead is used really right up until the 20th century.
Until we found out it was poison.
Yeah, yeah. But lead was used for a whole lot of stuff up until the 20th century. Ladies' makeup.
Remember those guys that always licked their
so-
pencil before they wrote?
Okay, so that kind of covers this one. Oh yeah, there's a piece of Delft.
Wow.
You can see the way that the glaze.
Oh, yeah.
Again, it's a Chinese design. Yeah, it lays really. You can see it lying on the pot, and it'll flake away really easily. Often we find you find the shirts with none of the glaze on them. You know?
That, isn't that this? Oh, you're saying this side the glaze came off.
Yeah, it's starting to chip away here. See the edges, but if you look at the side, you know, it lies. You know, there's a distinct break between the glaze and the
Gotcha.
paste of the
Yeah.
vessel. Whereas the creamwares and pearlwares, the glazes are binding better to the clay, so you don't get that kind
Solid
of.
piece.
Yeah. So there's some other things in here that are good. Yeah, some gun